Hello, coffee beans, and welcome back to Grab Your Brew.
Let's grab a brew, settle in, because today is season 1 finale of The Witch Engine.
We are sad but excited because we're going to have a whole lot more in episode 2. Over the course of this season, we've explored the machinery of accusation, the fear, the law, the stories people told about witches, and the terrible real-world consequences of believing those stories were true.
And today we're ending where so many English witch stories seem to gather like storm clouds. Pendle!
Pendle witch trials of 1612 are among the most famous witch trials in British history, and they're also among the best recorded, largely because of the accounts published the following year by court clerk Thomas Potts.
Before we get into the history, we need to talk about our visit. We did recently go to the Pendle Heritage Museum, and honestly, we both came away quite heartbroken, really deflated actually, didn't we?
Yeah, and it wasn't because of obviously it's horrific what happened to people, but not because the museum itself is bad, it isn't. But one of the most infamous witch trials in English history felt reduced to a very, very tiny small space. Very few displays, a few panels, a small, I won't even say room, more of a tiny cubicle, trying to hold something so enormous. And
Yeah.
it only had pictures of things rather than the actual things we were expecting to see.
Welcome to the museum. No, you haven't made a mistake. This isn't a building site. If you'd been standing on this spot in 1590, you'd been standing outside the earliest house built by the Bannister family, called Park Hill. If you fail, it's a building puzzle which raises more questions than answers. But there are clues to help us. Can you see the horizontal timber frame? Although badly charred, it tells more of the story. The timber was later incorporated into a new stone wall, which if you look carefully is not tied into, but butts into the arched door wall. This can only mean it was added later. Now where these walls meet, can you see the mason's mark? Now takes us across the now open Victorian cellar, a cool space below ground level, ideal for butter making and the like. Modern day fridges have now made cellars redundant. The window wall, as we call it, has 3 sets of 17th century stone mullion windows, where once you would be able to look out onto the river. Some of these were blocked and later replaced with 18th century timber sliding sash windows.
They were posters, weren't they? It was really deflating. And when you've spent months and months researching witch trials, persecution, fear, torture, testimony, law, and all the human devastation that went along with it, it's hard not to stand there and think, is this it? Is this all it gets?
Is
It's
this all it gets? Exactly. Best wording. Is this all? It really did make me sad because I was expecting to see, after all the horrific things people endured, like I said, pictures. I could have put together a better setting
yeah.
in my fucking bedroom because it wasn't just folklore. It wasn't just Halloween themed. It wasn't a spooky Lancashire brand. These were real people, real families, a legal process, a state-backed prosecution, imprisonment, trials, and executions.
So we don't want Pendle reduced to a few petty posters and witchy gift shop vibe. We need to sit with it properly. I mean, don't get me wrong, the
There was
museum
more witch
itself
stuff in
is
the gift shop.
beautiful. Yeah, but it was novel stuff. The museum itself is beautiful and Pendle is a lovely place. And, you know, the museum itself has a whole lot of history tied to one of the main families at the time. But it wasn't enough.
No. So today we're going to do exactly that.
So to understand Pendle, you have to understand the world that it happened in at the time.
This is Lancashire in 1612. Pendle Forest was not a neat postcard landscape. It was a rough, rural district of scattered farmers, difficult routes, extreme poverty, unstable harvest, disease, and communities heavily dependent on each other.
Mm. And in communities like that, misfortune, it had to mean something. They needed to blame. So if a cow died, if beer soured, if a child fell ill, or if a neighbour collapsed, on the road, as we will hear, people looked for a cause. They needed a cause.
And in a world that believed deeply in supernatural, witchcraft was not ridiculous, it was plausible.
More than that, it was legally actionable. Under the Witchcraft Act of 1604, certain forms of witchcraft, especially those believed to cause bodily harm or involved covenants with evil spirits, were capital crimes. King James the First, yes, the first, took me a moment, took witchcraft so seriously that he wrote Demonology, arguing that witches were real and dangerous servants of the devil.
Ooh, so when accusations appeared in Lancashire, they didn't enter a neutral world. They entered a legal and political climate already primed to believe the worst.
Whew, they didn't stand a chance. Most of what we know about the Pendle trials comes from near contemporary court accounts. Like we've said, it is one of the most documented. So it's not a modern verbatim transcript. It was written by Thomas Potts, clerk to the Lancaster Assizes, and published in 1613. Potts was instructed to write it up, and the judges reviewed the manuscript before publication, so it makes it invaluable. Not neutral at all, obviously, but it is invaluable.
The point matters because this is the surviving voice of the trial, but it's also the voice of the system that condemned them. This is a true and just record of arraignment and trial of certain witches in the county of Lancaster. Thomas Potts, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster, 1613.
So throughout this episode, when we quote Potts, we're hearing the primary source, but we're also hearing the official version the authorities wanted preserved. The event that seems to have triggered the Pendle case took place on the 21st of March 1612. So Alizon Device, granddaughter of old Demdike, encountered a travelling peddler named John Law from Halifax, and she asked him for pins. Pins were handmade, useful, and they could also carry magic associations within healing, divination, and love magic, is reported at the time. Whether she intended to buy them or was begging isn't clear, even in the records.
I guess today you would refer that as acupuncture, wouldn't you? Putting that out there. What
Ooh.
is clear is this. He refused, and shortly after, he collapsed. To us, his symptoms looked consistent with something like a stroke, but to people around him in 1612 and to Alizon herself, it became evidence of witchcraft. Imagine the guilt she felt.
I know, because she did confess, because she felt
Yeah.
bad.
And the problem is when there's so much hysteria in the air, somebody could you could be like, oh, well, I hope you die as a reaction of anger, and then they trip over a rock, smash their head open, and now all of a sudden you're carrying that guilt, thinking you're a
Yeah.
witch. This is also a quote. The said Alizon Device confessed that she had bewitched the said John Law. Thomas Potts, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster, 1613.
And that confession is fascinating because Alizon may genuinely have believed it. In a world where curses were thought to have real force, she may have interpreted coincidence, anger, and illness through the same beliefs as everyone else.
So the case doesn't begin with a cackling villain. It begins with a poor young woman in a world that already believed what happened next was possible. The local magistrate, Roger Nowell, authorities alert to disorder, dissent, and hidden wrongdoing. Lancashire also carried a shadow of recusity, and post-gunpowder plot suspicion.
That matters because Pendle wasn't just a random burst of superstition. It happened in a region the authorities already viewed as, bit dodgy, uneasy, half-controlled, and potentially disobedient is what was recorded now. Calling a whole village potentially disobedient did tickle me.
Seems a little far-fetched, don't it?
I know. Oh, that disobedient village.
How
Um,
dare every single person now be disobedient?
Oh, but once Nowell started asking questions, the whole thing just blew up.
Because Alizon didn't just accuse herself. No, she named others. Dun, 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 reoccurring pattern.
The centre of the Pendle case were two rival families. It's crazy, all of this over two families. First, the Demdike Device family, which is Elizabeth Southern's, known as Old Demdike, and her daughter Elizabeth Device, and then her grandchildren, which are Alizon, James, and Jennet Device. And then the second family, the Chattox family, so Anne Whittle, known as Old Chattox, and her daughter Anne Redfern.
Both families were poor. Both were associated with local magical reputations, and both appeared to have hated each other for years. That was the perfect fuel for a witch trial. Poverty, resentment, no television, reputation, history, and a magistrate taking notes that also does not have a TV.
Now, by the time the investigation had matured into formal prosecution, 12 people were accused in connection with the Pendle case. And we need to name them all because naming them matters. People don't even remember most of them.
There is so much power in a name.
Mm-hmm.
We have Elizabeth Southerners, as I butcher the name, Old Demdike, Elizabeth Device, Alizon Device, James Device, Anne Whittle, also known as Old Chattox, or as I said before, Chatterbox, Annie Redfern, Alice Nutter. Some of these names are sending me. I'm trying so hard not to laugh. It's not a laughing matter. Catherine Hewitt, John
Bulcock.
I know.
Say the name.
Bulcock. Such a child. Jane Bulcock. Jennet or Preston. Alice Gray. And the outcomes were stark.
10 were executed in total. 1 died in prison before trial. 1 was acquitted, but more specifically, 9 were hanged after the Lancaster Assizes, and at Preston was tried separately at York and executed there. Old Demdike died in prison, and Alice Gray was found not guilty, which is surprising, isn't it? A not guilty verdict.
Yeah. It takes the context of love thy neighbour a lot more seriously, because maybe if you'd have loved thy neighbour, we wouldn't have been in this drama. This takes like reality TV show to 1,000. It's like if a reality show so like Love and Hip Hop bred with Squad Games.
Squid Games.
That was Squid Games. So Squid Games. I just saw that
Squad.
someone was
Sorry.
So if Squid Games and Love and Hip Hop had a child together, that's what the witch trials were. Basically, death, drama, and chaos. Ugh.
I'm sorry. It's not a laughing matter. It's your description. It's tickled
I'm
me.
imagining like, clothes from 1612 doing all the drama and the fighting and the cat fights from Love and Hip Hop while they were being shot by Squid Games. That's the mental image that I have in my ADHD brain. But one of the most dramatic parts of Pendle's story is the meeting of Malkin Tower, which is not a tower, so don't let the words deceive you. The Device home on Good Friday, 10th of April, 1612. The authorities treated this as a witches' gathering, possibly even a conspiracy linked with freeing imprisoned suspects and further mischief. or it could just be people sitting down and having a fucking dinner. Quote from the book by Thomas Potts is, Device person came unto the house of Elizabeth Device, where they did confer together.
But here's where it gets fascinating. We have already pointed this out. Historians are not actually convinced that this was a dramatic satanic Sabbath. The evidence shows people gathered, ate food, and talked. A sheep was stolen and eaten, as you do, because the poor. But that's all we really have. So a lot of historians do suggest that it may have been a family gathering or a community gathering. And the fact that it happened on Good Friday also invites speculation about recusant Catholic context. You know, that remains interpretation, not certainty. But it
Yeah.
matters that the evidence is more ambiguous than the legend.
Everybody's known to feast on Good Friday unless you're fasting. So one of the
pagan.
most famous, I meant for that religious time frame,
Yeah.
whatever. Either way, Good Friday was known for having feasts.
Yeah.
So one of the most famous witches' meetings in English history may, in practice, have looked a lot like poor people eating together while already under suspicion.
Fancy that. Poor people eating. Whilst
Oh
under
my
suspicion,
gosh.
how dare they?
How dare they nourish their
Oh,
starving
I
bodies?
know. Oh, one of the most blurred details in the Pendle retelling is Jennet Preston. This is an interesting one that I hadn't known up until fairly recent. She wasn't tried. Well, I knew this, but she was tried with the main Lancaster group. No, stop. Sorry. So one of the most often blurred details of Pendle retelling is Jennet Preston. She was not tried with the main Lancashire group. She lived in Gisborne, Yorkshire. So she went to the York Assizes and was executed on the 29th of July 1612, weeks before the Lancaster executions.
That's important for
It
accuracy
is.
because people often compress Pendle into one event at one place. It wasn't that tidy. We know history is not clean and tidy. That's why we're supposed to tell the effing truth so people can learn from it. Stop trying to
Yeah.
cover up your dirty deeds. Sorry, let me bring myself back in. The legal machinery stretched wider than the story most of us first heard.
Mm.
The Lancashire accused were held in Lancaster Castle in conditions that were beyond bleak, crowded, and dangerous. Old Demdike, the most famous of the accused, never even lived to be able to stand trial. She died in prison before the Assizes.
And there's something especially grim about that. She became one of the most famous names in the story without ever receiving even the terrible formality of a final judgment. So the main Pendle defendants were tried at the Lancaster Assizes on the 18th and the 19th of August in 1612 before Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley. The prosecutor was Roger Nowell, who had gathered the statements and confessions during examination. Thomas Potts quote, "These prisoners were brought to the bar to receive their trial for sundry acts of witchcraft."
This is worth stressing. These were not modern trials. No defense counsel as we'd understand it. No modern
Yeah.
evidentiary standards. No confronting assumption that absurd claim would be laughed out of court. In this court, witchcraft was legally reality.
One of the most striking moments in the Pendle trials came from Jennet Device. Though around 9 years old and allowed to give evidence for the prosecution, that would have been unusual in many criminal contexts, but in witchcraft cases, it was a very normal rule to bend. Thomas Potts says, "The said Jennet Device said that her mother is a witch." I mean, this is a 9-year-old.
Can you imagine, like, I just want to give a mental image to the people that are watching this, especially if you have a child in this day and age. Imagine if you put your child in a timeout by, restricting them from their tablet, and then they went down the spoke to their friend and somebody over here saying, "My mum is an evil witch." Yeah,
Yeah,
you're insulted, but that day and age, you would have been murdered.
exactly.
That sentence by itself is absolutely devastating. You basically sent your mother to death over, you probably had a grudge with your mother. You probably didn't get a second scoop of porridge. Like, children don't understand the weight behind words. That's why this should never have happened. Janet gave
No.
evidence not only against her mother, Elizabeth Device, but also against her siblings and others she said had attended the tower meeting. Potts described her mother erupting in court, screaming and cursing, and being moved so that the child can continue. Imagine your own
So when,
child basically sentenced you to death.
but the poor child, the guilt they'd have felt because she has no,
She didn't know the weight behind those words.
no. And then it'd have been fear, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So when people say Pendle is eerie, and it can be, this is why a child stood in court and helped condemn her own family. And in one of history's nastier little twists, a woman named Janet Device later appears amongst those accused in 1634, but we can't prove it's the same person, but it could have been. So as an adult, that little child, there's no
What
the
goes around
speculation.
comes around.
Yeah, but she was a child.
Sorry. She was a child, but we
But
can make
yeah, it
reasoning
would
for
have been
people, but we can't make excuses for people.
no.
The
But yeah,
trial
it's only
moved.
speculation.
Yeah, speculation, we can't prove that. The trial moved quickly. 9 of Lancashire's Pendle defendants were convicted of hanging at the Gallows Hill. Lancaster on the 20th of August 1612. Alizon Device, Elizabeth Device, James Device, Annie Whittle, Annie Redfern, Alice Nutter, Catherine Hewitt, John Bulcock, Jane Bulcock.
The prisoners were condemned and afterwards executed according to the law. Quote by Thomas Potts. That phrase, though, according to the law, it's one of the coldest things, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's the point of this series, isn't it?
Just so many words and unable to articulate it without rage. That's the best way I can describe my emotions going over this series.
Mm.
The horror here wasn't just panic, it was procedure. So that's the wider Pendle story. The quarrel, the investigation, the rival families, the Malkin Tower meeting, the child witness, the Assizes, and the execution.
For the final part of this finale, we want to end with the 4 figures in the record who presented as the main self-implicating or confessing accused: Elizabeth Southerns, Anne Whittle, Alizon Device, and James Device. Potts presents them as the key figures whose admissions or statements helped to shape the prosecution.
And we want to sit with them properly, who they were, what they reportedly admitted, and what those admissions might actually mean.
Elizabeth Southerns, old Demdike, is the matriarchal shadow hanging over the entire Pendle story.
She was around 80 years old in 1612, blind by the time of examination, extremely poor, and already regarded locally as a witch for decades. Some accounts suggest she had been feared, for at least reputed, in the area for about 50 years before Roger Nowell ever took an interest.
That's important because the authorities didn't invent the reputation. She already had a reputation. So the community already believed that she had powers, and that likely means that she occupied, and again, we've talked about this earlier on, the classic dangerous position of a cunning woman or folk practitioner, someone who you might turn to for healing, charms, advice, or explanations, and then later blame when everything goes wrong.
Quote, she had a spirit which appeared unto her like a brown dog, whom she called Ball.
Ball is one of those eerie details people remember because it sounds so storybook. Familiars were common in English witch trial culture. A dog, cat, a hare. Suddenly, it's evidence. You're not just an animal lover, you're a witch. Once suspicion attaches itself to a person, that's it. You're screwed, aren't you?
Makes you scared to want to get a pet, don't it?
Yeah.
What's especially tragic is that old Demdike never made it to the courtroom drama. That made everyone else famous. She died in Lancaster jail before trial, so her voice survives only through the account written by the authorities who already believed what they wanted to prove.
And that leaves us with one of the big questions of Pendle. Did she confess because she believed it? Did she confess because she was old, frightened, and exhausted? Or because she knew what kind of answers were expected? I mean, we can't really know, but what we can know is her admissions did widen the net.
You've also got to look at the accused. Most of them were tortured. Imagine thinking about being tortured at 80 years old. I'd be like, yeah, I did it because either way, you're going to torture me and get me to admit to it anyway. If Demdike is one pole of the story, Anne Whittle, known as Old Chattox, is the other. She was also elderly, also poor, also feared, also embedded in local reputation long before the state made it formal.
And crucially, the Chattox and Devices sides appear to have had a long, bitter rivalry. I mean, it's scary, isn't it? Because this all boils down to two old ladies having a go.
Yeah, like I
Some
said.
versions connect it, yeah, it's crazy, but some versions connect it to theft. Obviously, we've only got court records, not a prelude. Um, some associate it with the competition as local magical practitioners. But whatever the origin, in 1612, these were not neutral neighbours, and then suddenly they caught up in a tragedy together. But they were already in a position to be primed with accusation, weren't they?
Yeah,
Easy targets.
definitely. Everybody got tired of hearing them squabble. Potts presents Chattox as making one of the most chilling admissions in the case, and he said in his book, quote, "The devil appealed upon to her in the likeness of a Christian man." That description is unnerving because it's not theatrical, not horned, not fire, not melodrama, just something almost normal.
Almost, because she was accused in connection with she was accused in connection with the murder of Robert Nutter by witchcraft. An earlier confession was read out at the trial. It's safer historically to say she confessed under pressure during examination, not to claim formal torture as a documented fact.
And then comes one of the most human moments in the entire Pendle story. At trial, Anne Whittle begged the court to spare her daughter, Anne Redfern. They didn't. Both were executed.
And again, that's what keeps pushing against the legends for me. These aren't just witches, the mothers and daughters dying together in a legal machine built on fear and belief.
I had to pause saying that because the thought of going through that as a mother and then your daughter right next to you.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, the devastation, oh my gosh, my heart's got really heavy. Alizon's device is where the whole disaster really starts. She was young, probably a teenager or a young adult. She was poor, from the Device family, and already shaped by a world in which witchcraft was not fantasy, but a lived possibility.
And that's why her case is psychologically fascinating, because when John Law collapsed after their quarrel, Alizon seemed to have believed that she harmed him. She really believed it. Quote from Thomas Potts: "The said Alizon Device confessed that she had bewitched that said John Law."
To us, this can read like suspicion or coercion or panic. To her, this felt like the truth.
And then under questioning, she did what I'm getting tongue-tied here. She did what witch trial suspects often end up doing. She named others. That included members of the rival Chattox family, and once that happened, the case grew from one incident into a network.
There's also a really haunting trial moment here. when Alizon came face to face with John Law in court. Pat says she fell to her knees in tears and confessed again. That's not proof of guilt in any modern sense, but it's proof of terror, belief, remorse, and some terrible combination of all three.
She clearly believed that she'd done it and felt shocking for it. It's heartbreaking. I mean, it could have
Yeah.
been a seizure or anything. Do you know what I mean? Science wasn't the same as it is now. Anyway, it is a heavy one. She was convicted and hanged at Lancaster on the 20th of August, 1612, and the entire Pendle case begins effectively with one poor young woman on a road and a man falling down. Last but not least, James Device, and this is the trickiest of the four because his role is often simplified. Safest way to put it is James made statements that materially strengthened the prosecution, especially concerning the Malkin Tower meeting and the larger sense that the authorities had uncovered a coordinated witch network.
He was Alison's brother, part of the Device family cluster. Pat's accounts used his words to support the story the court wanted to tell. There's something bigger than one coral had been found. Quote, Device's persons came unto the house of Elizabeth Device, where they did confer together.
And once the authorities accepted that interpretation, the meeting became a witches' assembly, a conspiracy, almost a template for organised evil.
But as we said, earlier historians have pushed back on that. The evidence is more mundane than the legend suggests, and more of the more dramatic political angles, like the angle planned to blow up Lancaster Castle, are widely treated with suspicion by historians and may reflect the examining magistrate's framing as much as anything James himself meant.
So that makes James Device such an important figure in this story because the statement shows how prosecution doesn't just discover a narrative, it builds it.
And maybe that's the most important thing to say about these four. Confession in a witch trial is not simple. It doesn't automatically mean fraud. It doesn't automatically mean truth.
It can mean belief, pressure, fear, exhaustion, religious imagination, social collapse, or answers shaped by what the interrogators already expect to hear.
So when we call them confessors, we're not saying the craft described by the court was real in the way that the court imagined it.
We're saying these are the figures Potts presents as the key self-implicating voices in the case.
Before we close this season, we want to do something simple. We want to say their names again because whatever people believed about them in 1612, they were being human beings.
The 12 accused connected to the Pendle case were Elizabeth Southerns, also known as Old Demdike, Elizabeth Device, Alizon Device, James Device, Anne Whittle, also known as Old Chattox, Anne Redfern, Alice Nutter, Catherine Hewitt, John Bulcock, Jane Bulcock, Jennet Preston, and Alice Gray.
10 were executed in total. 1 died in prison before trial, and 1 was acquitted.
And 400 years later, the voices we hear most clearly still come to us through the record written by the system that condemned them.
For centuries, the word witch has been tied to fear, trials, persecution, execution.
But the story doesn't end there, because while courts in places like Lancaster were condemning witches, traditions of magic, healing, ritual, and spiritual practice continued elsewhere, quietly or openly, legally, and reverently, and sometimes in plain sight.
And that's where season 2 begins. Not with the witch as a legal monster, but with the witch as a living, religious, cultural, and spiritual identity.
So when we return in October, we're going to move from accusation to practice, from persecution to belief, and from the witches the state feared to the witches who were and are Very real. Oh, thank you for grabbing a brew with us, and don't forget to like and subscribe. We need to grow.
If you have a case you'd like us to cover, spooky story to share, real or fiction, or a blind react submission, go ahead and send them to us at the email on the screen or any of the social medias at the bottom.
And we will see you next week with our new series, The Vampires.
Fires! I had to join you on
I
that
want
one.
to suck
Have an
your
amazing week,
blood.
guys.
Bye.